So before we get started, I just wanted to say that this has been a very lengthy and involved process. So Pat and I really appreciate the help of all the staff that's been involved, especially to Burke Engineering, who completed the water rate study for us. They do have some representatives here today if there's any questions that they can help with. We also wanted to thank the elected officials. We offered to sit down and review the rates of the study with all of you individually. Those were really good conversations with a lot of good feedback, so that was very helpful. And based on those conversations, we wanted to pull together the PowerPoint for tonight and the recommendations to discuss. And before really getting into it, just want to preface it that there's a lot of moving pieces that go into the water system and the functions as a whole, as you're all aware. So we did our best to make sure that the information is apples to apples comparison, but just keep in mind all communities do have different billing cycles, tiers, fees, different burdens on their systems based on their population, etc. So we tried to break it down in a way that hopefully makes as much sense possible based on our needs. So with that being said, by means of introduction, as you all know, we're a part of the Oak Lawn Regional Water System, which receives water from Chicago. And other than the automatic increases which occur in June and January, from Chicago and Oak Lawn's pass-through increases, we haven't increased our water rate since 2014, so it's been nearly 10 years. And since 2014, the CPI has increased nearly 30%, so with that being said, it's easy to imply that our costs of maintaining and operating the system have significantly increased while our rates have not. So unfortunately, this has led the village to deferring major capital improvements, drawing down on cash reserves of the water funds to fund emergency repairs, and ultimately transferring in money from the operating fund so that way we can fund the necessary projects and improvements when at the end of the day, our water funds should truly be enterprise funds that are self-sufficient. So just a little bit about the funds themselves. We do have 5 separate water funds. Of those water funds, you could see here from the fiscal year 24 budget that all of the expenses for each fund they are more than our revenues, when in all reality that should be the reverse. So again, you can see that we're having to find other ways to supplement our expenses, and these funds aren't operating as true enterprise funds. So drilling in just a little bit closer, this is taking a look at our water retail fund. You could see at the very bottom, it's about 17 million per the current fiscal year just to have this fund operate. So you can see that there's a lot of different costs that go into it. Our system contains an elevated storage tank, ground level reservoirs, pumping stations, and approximately 270 miles of water main. So it isn't anything that's cheap by any means. Another thing that we wanted to point out is that we do have an aging water system. Water main should be replaced every 40 to 60 years, and you can see, I know it's a little hard to see these graphs, but if you look closely, a lot of our water main is from the 70s and 80s. And so the first, the chart on the top up here shows just the age and the percentage of the water main that is that age. So if you look at 1970s, for example, about 23% of our town has water main from the 1970s. And then when you look on the graph below, you can see where a majority of our water main breaks are coming from. And that, again, when you look at 1970s, that's about 36% of our water main breaks. So it just goes to show that by looking at this and the age of our infrastructure, we have a lot of needs. In all reality, in an ideal world, we should be funding probably about $5 million of water main replacement every year. And in the last several fiscal years, I think the most, we're hovering at about 1.5 to 2 mil is all that we've been able to really fund. So in terms of process, like mentioned, the last water rate study, it was conducted in 2009. It was a 5-year plan that went through 2014, and we haven't had any increases since then. So in 2022, last year, we engaged with Burke Engineering to conduct a water rate study. And here we are, nearly a year later, but it really is a lengthy process. There's a lot that goes into it. There's the review of our current water funds, our existing water model, our 10-year capital plan, and future needs. And then again, when you're looking at the different communities, there's a lot of different comparable pieces to look at to try to make it as apples to apples comparison as possible. So with that being said, the water rate study was very informative and thorough, and ultimately it confirmed a lot of what we already knew. But since then, staff has also spent a significant amount of time looking into it because we know it's never favorable to recommend increases. Unfortunately, prior administrations haven't taken this on, so we know this is a tough decision and not an easy ask by the board, in any means. We're not naive to that. But I think this board also has been very responsible and knows it's important to maintain the health of not just our water system, but our village finances as well. So with no rate increases since 2014, the rising cost of infrastructure, labor and operating costs, continued development in town, increasing the demand on system, aging infrastructure, we have various recommendations that we want to touch on.
Yeah, just want to add to that too, talking with Public Works Department, with the acquisition by the Park District with the Mental Health Center, over the years, we've been looking at the dollars that would be taken for a lot of the infrastructure replacement that would happen out there. And current numbers is close to $70 million in utility infrastructure, with over 50 million of that being water. So that impact will directly affect, the residents here and our system that we have to account for.
And none of that's even reflected in this study, given that's all been a more recent thing that's come up, so. So some of the things we looked at include changing from a 2-tier rate system to a 4-tier rate system, changing from quarterly to bi-monthly billing cycles, implementing increases for fiscal year 24 per the water rate study recommendations, adjusting some base fees, and implementing a bi-monthly administration fee. So just touching on these each a little bit. While the study did provide options for a 5-year plan, the spread of the 5 years was nearly 60%. And while that number ultimately reflects the true needs of the system, staff feels that the combination of the recommendations we've pulled together will put our water funds back on track while still not placing too much of a financial burden on residents. So the main recommendation includes implementing a one-time rate increase, moving from a quarterly to bi-monthly cycle, and moving from 2 tiers to 4 tiers. So these changes will help the water systems and the funds in a variety of ways. Ultimately, adding new tiers and moving to a more frequent billing cycle helps keep costs low for the low-end users, enhances our water conservation structure, and should be easier to manage financially instead of being hit with a larger quarterly bill, while also helping with cash flow on our end a little bit. Moving on, again, this is kind of digging in just a little bit into the increase itself. I'm sure most residents would ask, what does this mean for me? So this graphic in particular kind of breaks it down and shows, that if you were, say, in the 8,000 gallon tier and we moved to a bi-monthly, you could see it would be about an $8 increase per month. This was a graphic that was pulled together based on the comparable communities around us. And just want to highlight that since this has been completed, Orland Park and Mokena both have increased their water rates, so that's not reflected in this. So where Tinley is kind of circled right now, we are, still kind of hovering below after those other communities have increased their rates as well. So, when you look across the board, you have Elmhurst at the top at about $295 per average bill, and that's for 11,000 gallons of consumption, whereas Tinley, again, even with the recommended increases, is at about $150 per average bill, and still on the very low end in regards to other communities. And then the last recommendation we have is to implement an administrative fee. So a lot of other municipalities do have this. It's something that would be new for us. I was talking with Brad today, and it was back in 2009 when we first added just base fees in general. There is a cost, just to simply have the system available. And outside of infrastructure costs, there is a large cost of doing business as it relates to the administration of our systems and shutoffs and, the behind the scenes that our staff partake in. So this is another recommendation we have as well. So I know that's a lot put into a short presentation. We are looking for feedback. Again, I know we've had some conversation. Again, we do appreciate, we know that it's never easy to come up here and ask the board to increase things like water rates, especially in today's day and age, but we do feel pretty confident that what we've all kind of talked through and worked through will help get our funds back on track to where they need to be moving forward. Because if we don't take action sooner than later, it's only gonna be a larger increase and a bigger burden on the community as a whole down the road.